So this is one of the newts, and the other one, which I think I'm going to pan over to in a second. There it is right there. That's actually its foot and its head. And you can see for yourself, that's what they did. They either fought the current or they hung out in the eddy where they didn't have to fight the current. So suddenly, we make crossbeds, and it explains all the fossil footprints we have in the coconino. Okay, I'll cover this real quick. Again, my favorite anti-creationist, Dr. Derek Ager, he tried to explain why the tracks only went uphill. He said, well, it's simple. The tracks on the windward side of the dune were destroyed. So the only tracks that were preserved were those that were on the lee side. That explains why they only go uphill. That makes no sense at all if you stop and think about it. That means the animals only ever walked in one direction in the desert. Makes no sense. But another person also suggested tracks going uphill are the only ones that make tracks. In other words, if you walk down a sand dune, you're not going to preserve tracks. Again, nonsense. When you take a look at white sands, you can see tracks going uphill, downhill, across the dunes, all over the place. I went over to the sand dunes, I walked up the sand dune, and I walked down the sand dune. You can judge for yourself. There's the ones going down, there's the ones going up. This is science. I felt silly doing it, to be honest, but I had to make the point. But here's the catch. Uniformitarian assumptions are slipped in when you're not looking. These are sand dunes, not crossbeds. And that is uniformitarian tactic number 54. Slip in the assumptions when not looking, okay? Now, again, the anti-creationists bring this up. They say it has to be fossil sand dunes. After all, we have fossil spider tracks. And these are supposedly fossil spider tracks. They call them octopoda because nobody really knows what they are. Others have quoted fossil scorpion tracks in the Coconino sandstone. That might be a problem for a global flood. How do you have these crossbeds being made by water with scorpion footprints and spider tracks on them? Okay, so what about the spider tracks? Number one, even tarantula spiders are incredibly light. You can put them on your arm and you'd hardly know they were there. They're not heavy enough to make spider fossil footprints. However, the sea spider is. There's a sea spider. Personally, I think that's the culprit for these fossil footprints. Again, it is not evidence of a desert. It is evidence of a global flood. And what about the scorpion tracks? Well, assuming they are scorpion tracks, we've also found scorpion tracks on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic. Fossil scorpion footprints. Down in Joggins, Nova Scotia, on the east coast, we found, get this, lizards, sharks, a coelacanth, which is a big fish, Spirorbis worms, which is a brackish water worm, horseshoe crabs, again a marine organism, giant sow bugs called the Arthropleura, and a damselfly. We've also found, get this, amphibians, just like the Coconino tracks, and a fossil scorpion. Nobody is claiming those are deserts. It can all be explained within the context of a global flood. Now, what I want to focus on today is the present cannot be the key to the past. Now, this comes from my homeland, my mother country, Canada. Eastern Ontario, this is on the Bruce Peninsula. This comes from a fellow by the name of Douglas Cox, a creationist. And these are giant wave ripples. And if you look carefully, that is actually a road. And this is another road. So this is an aerial shot. And if you look closely, you see what looks like wave ripples that you would normally see on a beach. Except these wave ripples are about 300 feet crest to crest. Those are big wave ripples. That takes a lot of water, a lot of fast-moving water. But it gets better than this. Last year, when I was flying home from Alberta, I took a more northern route, just north of Winnipeg. Once again, looking out the window, giant wave ripples. Here's a close-up. I'm going to show you what it looks like in NASA Whirlwind in a second. I actually went and studied those wave ripples after I spotted those from the airplane. If you're looking in Google Earth or NASA Whirlwind, they're pretty easy to find. You look in Canada, here's Hudson's Bay. And down here in Manitoba are two large lakes. So we're going to zoom in on those lakes. They're Lake Winnipeg and Lake Winnipegosis. So there's Lake Winnipeg and Lake Winnipegosis. When you find them, the wave ripples are primarily in here, but they're also up in here off to the left. They're actually up to 50 feet high crest to trough. They are a mile crest to crest. And as you can see, they're spread out widthwise hundreds of miles. This is not some little stream that happened to breach a small dam somewhere. This is a major catastrophe, a major water flow. This isn't some ice age dam that broke. This requires a global flood. The evidence is all around us. This is another place in Canada. This is on the Cypress Hills, on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Doesn't look like much, does it? It's flat, really flat. You're actually on top of a mountain here, a mountain of rocks, and it has been planed flat across the top by fast-moving water. And when you take a look just below the surface, there's the flat surface up top, and this has actually been eroded by water and a road. They actually built a road through there. And you'll notice that it's covered in these rounded quartzite rocks with these percussion marks. And I'll pass this rock around so you can see for yourself. What you want to look at is all these strange round hammer marks that are all over the rock, and we call those percussion marks. Okay, so I'm going to pass this rock around, if you could. We'll start here. Now, a lot of these rocks, this is actually still a medium-sized one. This is not that. There are others that are much bigger than this, as I'll show you in a second. And hopefully the camera will be able to pick up these percussion marks. But the key here is, in order to make these hammer marks, the rock has to actually be picked up by the water and carried in suspension. Now, I have a hard time picking that rock up with my hands and carrying it. For water to do that, get this, the water has to be moving for a rock this size. The water has to be moving at least 70 to 75 miles an hour. That's pretty fast water. It has to be at least 100 feet deep in order to pick the rocks up enough to drop them and hammer them against each other in order to make these percussion marks. Now that's for a rock this size. However, when I was in British Columbia, I found some rocks this size. Same rock, same percussion marks visible on the rock, and this rock is called quartzite. It's basically sand that has been compressed under tremendous heat and pressure and fused together into a very hard rock. So these quartzite boulders are all over the West Coast. Where are we here? We're in Illinois. I met a guy here at this very church last year who found some in Minnesota. And he recognized the rocks right away with the percussion marks and everything, and he was asking about it. So if you keep your eyes open and you find any, do let me know, because we're actually mapping where these are found. So if you find any, please do let me know. They are all over the West Coast. Now here's the catch. The way they have to be carried, by water, moving very, very rapidly, picks them up, and as it's moving them along, they hammer against each other, both rounding them and making the percussion marks. But the ones in Alberta did not come from Alberta. When we take a look at what they call the paleocurrents, we can tell which way the water was flowing. The paleocurrents tell us that it actually came from the direction of Idaho. But the nearest outcrop of that type of rock is some 800 kilometers away. That would be what, about 600 miles, give or take? So these rocks were ripped up from their host rock in Idaho. They traveled downhill a whopping 2 degrees downhill, not much downhill. They traveled 2 degrees downhill for about 600 miles, moving along at 75 miles an hour, held in suspension by water, and deposited in Alberta. This is a global catastrophe. All this happened 4,500 feet above sea level. Now let me explain why this is significant, other than the fact that it takes a heck of a lot of fast-moving water. To give you an idea, the water falling over Niagara Falls falls 150 feet, and it finally hits about the 65, 70 mile an hour mark after falling vertically for 150 feet. The fastest flash flood that I've ever heard of is actually the Brazos River in Texas, which I visited regularly, very famous for dinosaur tracks. The Brazos River has been recorded at hitting a whopping 35 miles per hour during its fastest flash floods. These speeds are so far off the chart that it's mind-boggling. It is profound evidence for a global flood. Now, this isn't too far away. This is down in Montana. These are the Beartooth Mountains. They cross over the Montana-Wyoming border. Now, I showed you the Cypress Hills, the top of it was flat, right? Well, it's hard to see here because it's down below, but this is also perfectly flat right across the top. But these mountains are solid granite. And again, everyone agrees the top has been planed flat by fast-moving water. That is 8,000 feet above sea level. How do you plane a solid granite mountain flat across the top, 8,000 feet above sea level, with fast-moving water without flooding the rest of the planet? You can't. Plain and simple. Again, more profound evidence just from geology showing that there has been a global flood. The present cannot be the key to the past. We do not have water picking up quartzite in Idaho and transporting it 700 kilometers at 75 miles an hour. And if it did, it would be a study in catastrophe. And it's a study, I don't know about you, I don't think I'd want to do that study. I think I'll try and avoid that one. You do not get mountains being planed flat across the top by fast-moving water 8,000 feet above sea level. And if we did, it would be a study in catastrophe, not long and slow geologic processes. Now, today, all around you, you see erosion. Riverbeds, stream beds, channels, etc. It's very easy to see. You can see it all around you. Yet, when you take a look at the rock layers, it's gone. It's not there. We also see things like soils. And soils grow very quickly. They accumulate very quickly. Yet, when we look at the rock record, they are gone. There isn't any. These rock layers in the Grand Canyon are supposed to have taken hundreds of millions of years. Yet we can have soils that grow in 10 years or less. Very healthy, organically rich soils. Even in the desert, you can get soils very quickly accumulating. Yet, they're completely gone from the geologic record. All that erosion, millions of years. Think about it. We can see streams and rivers carving out canyons and gorges today with our own two eyes. It's not a slow process, yet it is completely gone from the geologic record. That is not an indicator that the geologic record took a long time. It is actually an indicator it happened fast. This is a Banff National Park in Canada. Again, close-up look at the layers. No erosion, no soils. Where did it all go? Or maybe it's not the erosion in soils that's missing. Maybe it's the deep time that's assumed that is actually missing. And again, this all comes back to the whole idea of the old Earth. Yesterday I mentioned Joggins. This is the only place on planet Earth I have ever heard anybody claim that there are erosion in the layers. And this is an example. You can see the rock layers coming here. It bows down and then goes off again horizontal. Many have claimed these are eroded riverbed channels. However, if you recall yesterday, I showed you interbedding. That's all this is. It is very clear that the current went across the channel. We're supposed to be looking up and down through as if we were standing in the stream bed looking upstream. That's what we're supposed to be looking at. But when you look at the geology, it is clear the current was going across the channel, not up and down it. Once again, evidence that's claimed to be evidence of deep time turns out to actually support catastrophe. These layers were formed catastrophically by sheet flow, producing these strange erosional features that were actually made sideways, not by water going downhill. Okay, where's my water? There's my water. Okay, now something else you'll notice, and again, anybody can do this. Anybody can do this as you take a look at the world around you. Again,